Kelli Moore, it is awesome to have you on the podcast today. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, can you tell folks a little bit about who you are and what keeps you busy in this big, beautiful world?
Oh, yeah. So I am a former volleyball player and TV host. Grew up mostly in LA, went to USC, covered the Lakers and Dodgers, and left that career about 4.5 years ago to start a podcast, and then launched our production company, Soulfire Productions. So we produce about 40 different podcasts, mostly in the personal development, health and wellness space, with mostly female hosts. And throughout my TV journey and halfway through college, I was dealing with chronic illness for about 14 years. So had a misdiagnosis, and then finally found the right doctors and had a proper diagnosis. And then I was healed in a year and a half. And I haven't had any symptoms since. And I've had a podcast that I just ended last December because we were working on getting pregnant, going through IVF. So something had to give. But I had the Kelli Show for about 3 years. And that kind of transitioned from, talking about chronic illness and my journey and healing from that, and alternative medicine, and just supporting women in, alternative conversations. And then moved more into plant medicine and spirituality, and then talking a lot about sexuality and relationships. And so that's kind of where it ended. And now I have a show called Okay Babe with my husband, and we talk about relationships, love, sex, all the things. And then we run Soulfire together, and I am pregnant, and we have a couple dogs. So all the things keep me busy, girl.
I love it. Well,
Yeah.
okay. So, first things first, I'm so curious how you decided to make the pivot from TV, sports, being in that world, to personal development and podcasting. Like, what happened?
Yeah. I dealt with some sexual assault stuff, which was really sort of the catalyst for me to get out. I came out publicly about that at the very end. And I just, after coming out about being assaulted by a coach / player, you can't really go back, which I knew, and that was fine. But that environment was extremely toxic. When I came out, the amount of DMs I got from other female reporters about rapes they had experienced from players, coaches, the constant harassment, sexual advances, it's a really difficult culture to be in, especially as a young woman. Um, and I also had chronic illness that entire time. And so it was really hard. I felt like I was living a double life for so much of that, where I had to be the cute girl on TV that talked to all the famous people and had did the thing, was smiling and happy on live television. And then I would, go home from Dodger Stadium, and I would just want to die because I couldn't see straight. My whole body hurt. And I was just, I had chronic fatigue. I was so exhausted. And it was really hard to keep that up for so long. And, I lived for so much of that validation, especially in my early and mid 20s. Like, that's all that mattered to me. And I think that's what kept me going. And I made my parents proud, and I made a shit ton of money. And I, was quote unquote famous in LA, and, all the things that matter to you in your 20s, I guess. And then I had this awareness. It was when the Harvey Weinstein stuff came out that I realized that what I had gone through wasn't okay, and that I could say something. I just didn't know that it was okay to speak up for myself. And I feel like from that moment, with that 6-month sort of period, it's just all these awarenesses came forward. Like, you've been sick for so long, you've been grinding, you've been addicted to people telling you you're cute, you need attention, you need validation, you are being assaulted, like all these different things. And I was like, what am I doing with my life? Like, is this it? I don't even know who I am. I don't know why I do what I do. I just feel like I'm supposed to do the thing, and that's what I do every day. And so everything sort of, I decided to burn it all to the ground after that. And here we are.
What did it feel like to burn it all to the ground?
Really scary. Really scary. I have been a control freak my whole life. And I've also been very successful at so much of what I've done. I was a top volleyball player in the country, starting at 11 years old, top recruit, co-captain of the volleyball team, Final Four, straight A student, and then, big girl jobs in TV. And so it was like, everything was always like successful, planned out. I knew what the next step was. And this was really scary because I didn't know anything that was about to happen. And I left my career not knowing what I was going to do. And shortly thereafter, I ended up leaving my boyfriend at the time. And we had been together on and off for 4-ish years. And so it was just a lot at one time. And I think that I talk about this a lot, especially on my show, is like, I feel like we all sort of need that point where we finally realize enough is enough. And I don't know if that has to be your lowest point. I don't even know if that's quote unquote rock bottom, but it just felt like for me, I couldn't keep living for other people. And it just felt like I would rather be in the unknown and super uncomfortable and scared than staying in this perpetual cycle that I felt like I couldn't escape. I felt like a prisoner of my own life. And at least in the unknown, I wasn't a prisoner. I was just sort of like floating, like, okay, I guess we'll figure it out at some point. So yeah, it was really interesting. And I think that's what keeps a lot of young women from taking that leap, because it is really scary.
Yeah. And Kelli, something I've recently realized in my own life is that for a long time, I was waiting for other people to choose me. Like I was waiting to be chosen for the promotion at the job that I knew like was never going to actually come. Like I knew in my heart and my soul, like it was never actually going to come, but I kept looking for this outward validation from, I don't know, the men around me in a lot of scenarios, or the right man to choose me, or the right whatever to choose me. But it was never until I chose myself that I had success. And I think that, I don't know if it's a combination of age or doing the work or, what it is that finally brings that into like true focus. But that's what I'm hearing you saying is like, you decided to choose you.
And I agree with you 100%. Like, who is taught from a young age to choose yourself? You're not. You are taught to choose the happiness of your parents, to fulfill their needs, to make your teachers proud of you, all down the line. And I even look, of course, I'm like knee deep in parenting books at this point, but I read about even parents who don't force their children to hug people if they're uncomfortable. And I'm like, that's so interesting, because that child is learning to choose themselves and choose how they feel in their comfort level, not put their needs aside in order to make some random uncle comfortable, right? Like, you don't know this person, that's a stranger. So you're taught that that's a stranger, but you're taught to bypass what you're taught and go hug that person anyway. Right. And so I think it's like little things like that from a very young age, especially as young women and little girls. And we're not taught to honor ourselves or really listen to ourselves. And that was one of the biggest things that I started to learn, especially as I transitioned out of television and into personal development and sitting with plant medicine, is that I never listened to myself. I didn't even know what my own voice sounded like. All I heard were my 20 bosses in television, my mother, my dad, all my teachers, all these people who were influential in my life. And I just kept checking all of their boxes, but I never heard my own voice. And it wasn't until I got quiet with myself and I really started to connect with my body, especially healing from chronic illness, where I felt so disassociated from myself, where I started to hear my own voice, my own needs, my own desires. And I'm like, this is not how I've been living my life. And I just don't think that we're taught how to even tap in and go within and listen and be okay with letting go of all of that other noise and saying, I have to hear myself first.
Yeah. What do you mind sharing what type of chronic illness you had and what that journey has been like of trying to being misdiagnosed and figure it out? And
totally. Yeah, that was a shit show. So when I first got sick, I was 19, best shape of my life. We had just come off of spring training. I was killing it, captain of the team, the whole thing. And one day my leg gave out. And then after that, it was a complete disaster. I couldn't stand up straight. I was literally bent over at the waist. My leg was completely numb. It dragged behind me, couldn't see straight. My whole body hurt from head to toe. It felt like really deep bone pain where someone was like squeezing every bone in my body really hard. And I felt immediate depression. and had no idea what was going on. And I was extremely tired. Like all I wanted to do was sleep. And a year and a half before that, I had had mono for 8 months, but no one ever tested. No one ever correlated.
So you didn't know you had mono?
No, I knew I had mono. Like I had been tested. It was like, you have mono. I was sick for 8 months, like so sick, couldn't play, nothing. And then I got in great shape. Everything was fine. And then this happened, but no one ever thought to look back at that, nor did I. I mean, I wasn't in this space. So I was like, whatever the doctor says. So from that point so that was in April until December, I was completely misdiagnosed. They thought you have a torn disc in your back. You know, they think of all the athlete things. Like, what did you do in the gym? Torn disc, nerve, whatever. And no, I mean, I was working with world-renowned doctors at USC and no one could see anything on scans, could have any clue what was going on. Got to December, saw a rheumatologist. He said, you have fibromyalgia. You'll never play volleyball again. You have to give up your scholarship. Here's some pills. I was on a nerve blocker called Lyrica. I was on like 9 different painkillers, muscle relaxers, the whole thing. And he said, here's your life. And I didn't know anything at the time, nor did my mom. And we were like, okay, like this is what we're doing. So move off an athletic scholarship, become a normal student, take all these drugs every day. My eating disorder kicks in. I mean, it's just a mess. My body is completely falling apart. So from 19 to 21, did what they told me, graduate, start working for ESPN. I'm traveling all over the country. I'm miserable. I'm drinking. I'm taking all these meds. I'm numbing out because I'm like, what the hell's going on? And I finally realized I can't live like this. This doesn't make sense. How does a 19-year-old go from being in the best shape of her life, completely killing it, to this? Like, that doesn't make sense to me anymore. I finally started questioning it.
Yeah.
So I go cold turkey off everything. I stop drinking. I stop taking the meds. I start researching holistic healing. And so that journey was probably 21 to 25, vegan, vegetarian, different supplements, like anything I could get my hands on. And then I found paleo at 25. And that was the biggest change I had experienced, because that really helped me take out a lot of the inflammatory foods, because vegan made me really sick because a lot of those foods were inflammatory for me. And so did paleo. Then I found the autoimmune protocol through the paleo mom, Dr. Sarah Ballantyne. And this was before she blew up. I just like lived and died by everything this woman said. If anyone has chronic illness or autoimmune disease, I highly recommend her stuff. She's incredible. So I just did what she said, started getting better. But I was still very sick. Then I was listening to the Balanced Blonde, Jordan Younger's podcast, and she was a friend of mine in LA. And I didn't really know what she had been going through, but I'm listening to her show. I remember exactly where I was, walking in Santa Monica, right on Ocean Avenue. And she starts talking about functional medicine and this doctor she's been working with and how he's healing her gut and looking at all these things that no doctor's ever looked at. And I was like, well, I've tried everything, so might as well do this. So I find Dr. Lekos. I go meet with him. I spend 2.5 hours with this man. He is a freaking angel. He's a functional medicine doctor. And he's like, you don't have fibromyalgia. Like, there's so many other things going on, but it is not that. So we do all the testing. 2 weeks later, get everything back. We did, all the stool testing, blood, saliva, everything you would do. I had extreme numbers of Epstein-Barr in my body. So it reactivated. I had SIBO horribly. I had extremely bad leaky gut. I have the MTHFR genetic mutation, so I don't methylate. I can't process or detox. And I had chronic fatigue. So, of course I feel awful. So he starts getting me treatment on all of these things. I also did ozone therapy like 4 or 5 times, and was on his very strict protocol, which was just like a more strict version of the autoimmune protocol. So I was already doing the right things, but nothing could be fixed because I had the SIBO bacteria as well as leaky gut. And so I just like amped up everything he said. And then I was doing that. And then I also found an Ayurvedic practitioner, Marta Sofer, at Surya Spa in Los Angeles. Also an angel. So I worked basically tandem with the two of them. And the great thing is they were very much on the same page about everything. and went through probably 30 days of panchakarma, just cleansing all my tissues, started working with a shaman,
Mm.
started, getting into plant medicine. I was healed within a year and a half completely, have never had a symptom since. And it was just life altering, as you can imagine. So,
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that story.
yeah.
I know there's something going on in my body. It's been happening
Mm,
for a while. So I'm kind of
mhm.
at the beginning of like, I'm tired of being told that I'm crazy or it's nothing, and
Yeah.
like starting on that journey. I want to touch on the plant medicine piece, but
Hmm.
before we do, I'm curious. There's this piece of like waking up to yourself, like waking up to your own inner knowing. How how did that journey, like, how did you get there?
Yeah.
Because what made you say like, no, I'm not gonna just believe what they told me anymore, like I'm gonna trust me?
Such a good question. I think a lot of things. I think TV and that environment really was the catalyst for that, because I started to see the lies. So much of my job was covering athletes that, some of the best athletes in the entire world. What is portrayed on television is not the truth. And I knew the truth, but I still had to go on TV and talk about them like they're amazing people. Um, and so I think those types of experiences started to help me see that not everything I saw or experienced was true.
Mm,
And I think that it allowed me to start questioning the system. And then I think being sick for so long and no one ever figuring out what was wrong, and then doing more research about how screwed up the Western medicine medical system is,
right.
I started to see how people just take things at face value and aren't willing to go deeper and find the root cause or the root issue
Right.
in anything. And I'm a very curious person. Like, I interviewed people my entire life. I still do, for a living.
Yeah.
My whole job is to like penetrate deeper. And so I think I put my curiosity hat on, and I just started seeing like, okay, where can I go deeper here? Where does this not make sense? Where are things not adding up? Where have I just been trusting people who tell me what to do? Bosses who tell me how to act, how to be, like dress slutty or flirt with this guy, do that thing. Where's all the missing pieces?
Yeah.
And how can I start to advocate for myself? That's a huge thing I learned in the chronic illness community that people don't talk about in medicine. And I'm learning a lot in the birth world now, is that we're not taught to advocate for ourselves. We're taught that this is a doctor, you just trust them.
Right.
Well, something Dr. Lekos taught me the first time I met him was that doctors don't get continuing education unless they seek it out. And the medical books are 30 years behind.
And
So
have
they're going
nothing, like a paragraph about nutrition.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're going to school. And like I told someone this the other day, look, I don't necessarily blame doctors. I think it's a top down issue. Um, but if you're learning from books that are 30 years old, how are you going to have the latest research on Lyme disease and Hashimoto's and Epstein-Barr and all these things? How are you going to understand what gluten is doing to people's bodies and the soil and all of these different things when that's just what you're being fed? And Dr. Lekos went on, as soon as he graduated from medical school, went overseas and did continuing education and basically took on an entire other functional medicine degree
Um,
on top of his regular degree, which is why he's able to do what he does, right? But that's very rare. And so I think it was a lot of things. I just started to see the lies. I started to penetrate deeper. I got more curious and I learned how to advocate for myself. And the more I questioned, the more I learned and the better I felt. And so I started to see those correlations. And I think it was just sort of a domino effect from there.
So for the person that's listening right now that might think, oh my goodness, there's certain things in my life where I'm either not choosing me or I'm not listening to myself. What advice would you give them around starting to practice using that muscle?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's something I still struggle with. Like, I'm a people pleaser and I'm very codependent by nature. So, even today, my husband's in a weird ass mood and I'm like trying not to internalize it and make it about me. I'm like, did I annoy him? Is he not attracted to me? I'm a whale. Like, I'm just make up 7 stories about how it's about me. And
Right.
he just finally came to me and he's like, I don't think I slept well. I just feel weird. And I was like, oh, okay. And I think we do that. And I think that that's such a good practice of how can I let him have his experience and not put myself in his spiral of whatever that is,
Right.
even if it is about me.
Yeah.
It's not really about me. How can I choose myself in that moment and take care of me? How can I discern what's mine and what's his?
Mm-hmm.
I think that so often we're so quick to create a story or go into an old pattern without asking ourselves why.
Right.
And I think one of the most profound things I did was when I started journaling at the very beginning of my journey was asking myself those questions like, okay, I reacted in this way. Why do you feel the need to react that way? Why does it elicit this sort of response in you? And just having radical honesty with myself, and it started to help me see how so much of my decision making was based on my relationship with my mom from a very young age and how codependent we were and how manipulated I was and how everything she did was like vicariously through me. And she needed me to need her and be there. So when I think when you start getting honest about stuff like that, you can start to see the patterns that emerge that are actually not yours. Like you didn't create them. They were sort of given to you at a very young age. And then you can separate yourself from that and say, okay, is this my mom or is this me? Is this my belief or is this something I was handed? Okay, if it's not mine, then what do I believe? And you may not have that answer right off the bat, right? It might take you some time because that takes a lot of critical thinking and self-exploration and honesty and all of that. But I think if you are willing to go down that road, then you can write your own story. Then you can really discover what's yours and what you want out of life rather than just living from someone else. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
absolutely. Absolutely. Can we talk about plant medicine?
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, and I'm not quite sure which plant medicine you're referring to,
Yeah.
but as I've been struggling with, I'm sure there's some chronic fatigue, something is going on. I'm way more tired than I should be for someone my age and with the amount of exercise and things like that I do, and trying to eat right. However, and I've never shared this on my podcast, but I feel like this is the right time to start talking about it. I did a mushroom journey a couple years back, and after that journey and those journeys, I felt better than I've ever felt in my whole life,
Mhm.
on lots of different levels. And I'm curious, is that the type of plant medicine we're talking
Mhm.
about? Okay, so tell us about your experience. And thank
Yeah,
you for letting me come out about my plant medicine experience.
totally. Good for you. I love mushrooms. Yeah, so I've done ayahuasca. I've done a few ceremonies of ayahuasca. That was the first plant medicine I ever did.
Mhm.
People think I'm crazy. They're like, you started with ayahuasca? And I was like, I was ready to go. Um,
When
and
you're ready, you're
then
ready.
yeah. And then started with mushrooms after that, had my first experience with mushrooms with my now husband, and have microdosed quite a bit over the last few years, with a few bigger, dosed experiences. But for me, I'm very sensitive. So I can do a very small amount and just like blast off and have a really amazing experience. Um, I've also, um, I've also worked with LSD. I've microdosed LSD, as well as had some experiences with MDMA, which these are not plant medicines, but I just want to give an entire scope of my experience. I think that's everything. Oh, and I've also done combo, which is the frog medicine where they burn you. It sounds aggressive. It's a ceremony. They burn little kind of like not holes, but they just burn your skin enough to where they take the venom of the frog and then they place it on you. And it's an ancient tradition. And it's a purgative. It's about a 45-minute purging experience, and purging can be different for everyone. But it's incredibly cleansing. And for me, I did it before ayahuasca the second time, which I loved. It's an amazing way to sort of set the stage, which is how they use it in the jungle.
Mm.
And they specifically use it back in the day, like warriors would be going off to battle and it would like get their bodies ready.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've done combo probably 7 times. And I love it. It's amazing. It's really beautiful. So my experience with plant medicine has been so incredible. And the way I like to explain it to people who have never done it is it feels like, you know, when there are parts of your life or yourself that you don't understand and that don't make sense, or that things are missing and you're like, how does this go to this? I don't get it. Specifically, ayahuasca for me fills in the gaps.
Mm.
It's like I leave ayahuasca sort of jumbled because it definitely like sort of flips you upside down and says, okay, you know, question everything. But it also feels like all the puzzle pieces came together. And you're like, oh, right. So for example, in my first ceremony, I think it was the second night, I relived my birth.
Oh.
And I knew that I had a quote unquote traumatic birth. That's how my mom described it. I had an emergency C-section. They thought my mom and I both had staph infection.
Oh,
She had
wow.
105-degree fever. So they had to, you know, yank me out. And that's really all I knew. So I go through my entire birth. It's extremely painful. All I see is my mom rejecting me, like literally putting her hand up to me when they bring me to her and saying, no, I don't want her. And I was so disturbed in the ceremony because I was like, I knew it. My mom didn't want me. And we had always had like this weird, like I said, like codependent, manipulative, but also a lot of tension, all these things. And so I leave the ceremony and I'm in Santa Cruz. I'm driving back to LA and I call my mom and I'm like, hey, can you explain to me my birth, like in more detail? She explains what I had just told you, but then she said, yeah, so they took you and they were treating me and I was on morphine and I didn't see you. Like I was away from her for days. And then they bring me back to her because they're like, you need to breastfeed her. And my mom says, no, I'm not going to breastfeed her. I'm on morphine. I'm not giving my child morphine.
Oh.
That was the hand up. Like, no, I do not want her. Right. Like, I do not want her to experience this.
Right.
But my whole life has been her rejecting me, not realizing that at the end of the day, she was actually trying to protect me.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And then my entire fucking relationship with my mom made sense. And I'm like, and I have such deep abandonment and rejection wounds
Right.
that really never made sense to me. And so after that, it's like that made sense, right? I could see where there was the tension. I could see where there was the miscommunication. And it just brought me such peace.
Yeah.
Kelli,
Kelli, how were you able to integrate after that? So like what were the integrations that helped that continued healing after that experience?
Yeah, I mean, integration after plant medicine is intense, especially ayahuasca. I was shaking for about 10 days straight, which is normal, but it's just a lot. And it's your body, like on a cellular level, responding to what it just went through. You know, I was throwing up for hours at a time. I was shaking, I was crying, I was dancing, I was doing all these things. I was letting energy move through me. And so your body continues to respond for a long time. And so that was really intense. But I think I was more willing to be honest and have honest conversations with myself and the people around me, which allowed all of the realizations and the understanding I had from those ceremonies, from microdosing mushrooms, whatever it is, to integrate into my life. I think one of the shadow sides of plant medicine and the spiritual community is that people become obsessed with being in ceremony, but they're not willing to integrate and actually make change in their life. They're like, oh, well, I just need more ayahuasca. And it's like, no, you don't. One of the most important things that I've ever heard, and it was from the first guy who ever facilitated ayahuasca for me. He said, what I need you all to understand is that this ceremony is not actually the ceremony. The ceremony is when you leave here. The ceremony is the integration. You don't need to come back to this all the time to change your life. And it is so important. We have chosen to be human. We're having a human experience for a reason.
Yeah.
Like, I really believe we are souls that have chosen to have a human experience on purpose, to learn our lessons, go through our karma, all the things. And so if you just continually stay in ceremony and you're up in the ethers, you're never having the human experience.
Right.
I think our role is to bridge that. How can we bridge what we learn from the spiritual realm and being open to that and the different dimensions and lifetimes and all of that, and bring it here to integrate into humanity?
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. I think that that's so strong. I'm also amazed with my experience at how well it helped me with disordered eating, and how it like my body became more my own and less a story that I was telling myself afterwards, where I was able to just marvel at the experience within my body. And that's been mind blowing for me.
What did you see or feel or hear in your experience that you feel like led to that?
Well, it's really kind of esoteric in some ways, but I had an experience of the second time I had more of a journey dose, I'd say. Well, I've done mushrooms 5 times over the last probably 2.5 years. And so in 2020, I had kind of a first experience of a very microdosed experience, and then kind of 2 journeys a month apart from each one. And so the first journey dose was really like just joyful, lots of laughter, lots of it was like oddly, I'm a pretty serious, stoic, deep thinking, emotion filled person. So it was a very interesting juxtaposition for me of like showing me that I could learn through joy is what it felt like. And then the next time, about a month later, was I had an experience of looking myself in the eyes in the mirror and really just falling in love with me and who I was in that moment, and realizing that I'm what I've waited for. And then as that experience intensified, then I had an experience of just looking at my skin and the physical body. And it's hard to explain it to those that maybe haven't experienced it, but I have a feeling you know what I'm talking about. Just
totally.
Like that, just the marveling at how amazing our bodies are. It's just this deep appreciation that happens for being alive, being a soul in a body for a little bit. And then I kind of felt like I morphed into, it's even weird to say it out loud, but like morphed into like a panther. And I was like kind of literally prowling on all fours at one point during this experience. And that feeling of like this powerful, like prowess within myself, and really that embodying my own strength, and knowing that you can't do that if you're starving yourself, and you can't do that if you're berating yourself. Like this knowing came afterwards, but that like I can't be that panther, I can't be that strength, I can't be that power if I'm berating myself, or if I'm spending a whole bunch of time wondering what I weigh on a scale, which is ridiculous. It doesn't matter. Like nobody else cares about that. Why do I? Right. When there's so much more to my being than that.
Yeah, I love this experience. I think mushrooms always get me out of my own way.
Yeah.
And I think that it's fair to say that's what your experience was. It got you out of your own way. It got you out of your head, and it got you into your body, and it reconnected you with your body. And I really feel like plant medicine specifically, I wouldn't say that MDMA or LSD do this. But plant medicine is so smart. And if you've ever, what is that show? Fantastic Fungi on
Yes.
Netflix.
Yeah. So good.
So good, right? Like if you don't understand the connection between the earth, human bodies, and mushrooms, please watch Fantastic Fungi if you're interested. It's amazing. But it like we are almost the exact DNA of a mushroom. So when you are sitting with mushrooms in a ceremonial healing experience, sometimes, I mean, I've done, a little mushrooms at a Lane 8 concert and just felt so connected to my body and so connected to the earth. And like, we are all one, it can happen in a lot of different ways. But I think when you're very intentionally ceremonial about it, it's like the mushrooms come into your body and they find exactly where you need them.
Yeah.
To fill you back up and to clear.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really profound, like co-working experience.
Yeah.
Like you're collaborating on tapping into whether you want to call it your highest self or like your deeper knowing, whatever that is, your intuition. And it's like you have this little entity that comes in. My husband calls it Uncle Mushroom. It's like Uncle Mushroom comes in and is like, girl, I got you. Like, let's do some little discovery. Okay, that gets to go. Clip that out. Okay, fill that cup back up. That one's empty. And then you leave and you're like, oh, wow. Like, how many ways was I getting in my own way? How many things was I attaching to myself that I don't need anymore? What fucking bullshit stories have I just been living in that get to go? And you kind of see it all laid out. And it's like you said, you just have like this clarity of like, oh, I don't have to do that anymore.
Yes. The other thing that happened to me is I'm normally, in the past, I have been a very anxious person, like anxious attachment to, stuff, as well as just overarching anxiety. And that particular summer, the anxiety and the level of anxiety that I had experienced in the past dropped away close to zero, I would say. And I have a hunch that part of the fatigue issues are anxiety related. And so I think that part of why I wasn't feeling as tired right after those is because of the assist that it gave me in dropping the anxiety, which I don't know, that was the first time in my adulthood that I didn't experience the level of anxiety that I normally feel.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think going back to different options, because we're seeing trials go through and more assisted therapy. I haven't done ketamine before, but I know for people with severe anxiety, PTSD, eating disorders, ketamine assisted therapy can be incredibly helpful for what you're talking about, as well as MDMA assisted therapy. I think less people, I don't know all the laws or what it looks like for psilocybin. But I know that those two are amazing options. So if anyone's like curious about that, there's practitioners all over the country, and depending on what state you're in. But I think that you can really access this. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend ever doing this alone.
Yeah.
Because the integration can be so intense. And if you don't feel equipped that you have resources and support, it can actually make things far worse, especially if you deal with any mental health issues like schizophrenia, bipolar, all of that. So those are things to really be aware of. But I think that if it's something that you feel like I need to go deeper with myself, like how can I have deeper support where I can get out of my head? Those are all really amazing options to look into.
Yeah. I'm so with you and agree with you on that. I do think an assist and talking to a therapist or a doctor about this that can be really helpful in that the right therapists and doctors about this type of therapy is an important step in that.
Yeah. And if anyone's looking, everyone always asks me after I'm on podcasts, but if anyone's looking for an ayahuasca retreat recommendation, we love Soltara in Costa Rica. They are just class all the way. They bring in the Shipibo healers from Peru. They're the most incredible. They've been working in the jungle with the plants since they're in their teens. very in integrity. The retreat center is only for ayahuasca. So it's not like a yoga. It's not people just going around. They also have 5-star food, private chefs, tons of support and integrators. So I would highly recommend it. It's also very safe. The second you land, like they have you. So I know a lot of young women who like want to go to Peru and have this experience. And I would recommend against that. I think just for safety purposes and the integrity of the medicine, it's really important to go to places where you're going to be very, very held from start to finish.
Wow. That's so lovely. Thank you for
You're welcome.
adding that. There's another piece to your story that I'm really curious about. So you go from being in television to really starting your own business. Was this something you'd always wanted to do? Was it something that developed out of necessity? Like, can you connect those dots for us a little bit?
Yeah. No, I wanted to be on Good Morning America. That was my trajectory. I was working for the Lakers and Dodgers and trying to get more eyes on me in order to move more into entertainment and, morning television. And I always wanted to have my own show, but every time I pitched anything, every time I had an idea, aside from the PR guy at the Galaxy, which was the soccer team I covered, he let me have my own like online show with the players, which was super fun. That's the only time I ever really got a yes. And I just felt very constricted, as a young woman in television surrounded by a bunch of guys. And I just felt like I could never really use my voice. Most of my scripts were written for me. I just read off the prompter. It was like, okay, do this thing now. And it wasn't, I didn't feel like I was expressing myself for the most part. I felt like I was putting on a show that other people had written for me, and so when I left television, I had about 6 months where I wasn't working, and I just started thinking about what is it that I want to do. I don't have a lot of skills. I thought at the time, I think I have a lot of skills now, but at the time I'm like, I don't have a lot of skills. All I've ever done is work at Lululemon for 6 months or be on TV. That's all I had ever done, which I was super fortunate to start at a young age, but it didn't really lend itself to like a resume that allowed me to go do other jobs. So I realized that I wanted to use my ability to interview people because I knew that I was so good at that, but I wanted to move that into supporting women. I was tired of being around men. It was toxic. I didn't like it. And I also had a lot of sisterhood wounds that I wanted to heal. I had been bullied my whole life, not only just as a young girl, but in television. The older women at my station treated me horribly, tried to get me fired. It was really bad. And so I just felt like I want to fix this. And I know I need close girlfriends and I want to be mentored by amazing women. And so I kind of took that all and funneled it into the show. And before I even started, I was just watching TV every day because I was really sick at the time. I was basically bedridden. And I was watching Oprah Super Soul Sunday every day. And I used to love Oprah. And I started doing this thing out of nowhere. I don't know why I started it, but I was watching her show and I noticed that she just wasn't asking really good questions. Like, how can I sit here and criticize Oprah? But I just noticed that she,
what you mean.
Yeah. And I was like, this isn't penetrating. I feel like there's so many holes. Like, I feel like I leave the interviews with more questions than I started with. Mm-hmm. And so I started writing down all the questions I would have asked the guests, like Eckhart Tolle and, all these incredible thought leaders. And I had a running list of hundreds and hundreds of questions. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. I'm not having to ask people about a home run or, why they sucked that night or whatever, the loss. It's like, no, like probing life altering questions that I was also asking myself at the same time. And then I made a list of like 200 people that were my dream guests for the podcast. And almost every single person said yes, including Dr. Patty Fletcher, who wrote the book Disruptors, which I was reading on the couch, so depressed and so lost. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. That book got my ass off the couch. Like, that woman changed my life. I emailed her and her assistant and immediately got a response back. Yes, would love to, flew to Boston. She was one of my first guests live on the show or in person on the show. And I just started to see, it started to build my confidence of you can do this, and you can do this talking about whatever you want. And I could hold my own, and I could, I could be the one that it was my show. I could dictate what this felt like and looked like and who it was serving. And that it was actually on purpose and helped people. And then from there, when I met my now husband, he had been in the podcast space, and I had been with a production company that it was a joke experience. And I'm like, there has to be a better way. And so the two of us, as well as our now COO, Sam, who had worked at my other production company, we just created Soulfire. And we just, again, it's like, I think my greatest trait is that I am able to identify the holes and see what's not working. And I just go in and fix it. And that's what we did. That's what we did with my podcast. That's what we did with Soulfire. And at the end of the day, like, the whole point is to be of service to more people, to have more conversations like this, so that people can be happier and more fulfilled and have better lives.
I love that. And Soulfire is such a great name, by the way.
Thank you.
It's not a lot, but it's so good.
Yeah, thank you.
What else would you like folks to know about?
Oh, wow. I mean, I think the only other thing we haven't touched on that really radically changed my life is my sexuality. And I don't think you need to, I came out as bisexual a couple years ago when I realized that I had a sexual romantic attraction to women. And then I was able to really acknowledge that part of myself that was super suppressed. It totally transformed me, my relationship, because I realized it early on when I was dating Connor, and our company. Because whether it's your sexuality or just freedom of who you are in general, just how you are, your personality, I think any time that you suppress parts of yourself, you're not showing up as who you are, and you're not reaching that potential, and it's like almost like that double life thing again. Like, oh, this is how I feel, but that's not okay. So I'm going to present as this and make sure people are happy and okay with me. And once I started to realize that about myself, started to explore that and really take ownership over my own desires, I was able to ask for more, ask for what I wanted in the bedroom with my husband, feel comfortable in self-pleasure, not feeling like I'm wrong or bad for my desires. And it changed the way I started showing up in the world, because I didn't feel like I had to hide myself in a lot of ways. And it felt like I am the most fully expressed version of myself, and I could change my mind at any time, and that's also okay. And this is where I am, and I get to be curious into what this feels like and how it makes me feel and express myself daily. And I talk about this all the time, but it's like our business took off. We made more money. I was so much happier. Our communication and our relationship was amazing. Neither of us felt like we had to hide. It opened up my husband and his own like sexual beliefs and like body image beliefs and all these things. And he was able to ask for what he wanted, and so I think that's been really, really profound. So if anyone is feeling like questioning their sexuality or just scared to share like what you want with your partner, I just ask that you just get curious with yourself and be willing to get a little uncomfortable, because I really feel like it can be such a catalyst for every part of our lives, including people struggling with chronic illness. I think it's a huge part in that space.
Interesting. I'm so glad you brought this up. So I run a morning group. We do writing, 30 minutes of morning pages, and then 30 minutes of talking about what came up for us. And we sort of touched on this morning, in that it was spurred by, I want to give credit to where it initially came from, which was Brene Brown's Dare to Lead podcast, the interview she did with America Ferrera.
Ooh, I haven't heard that.
Oh, it's really good. And at the end of this 2-part podcast, spoiler alert coming, America said that bringing her sexuality into her life in where she chose on her terms was one of the most important leadership moves she ever made. And I've built my work around creativity, and I believe that creativity is a very, very, very broad term. But I believe that the meaning of life is to love. And the way we express our love is through creativity, which means that our sexuality, no matter what form that takes, has to be present and not suppressed. And I'm not saying overtly sexual or sexualized, but our sexuality has to be acknowledged and present and not denied and not kept in the shadows, because it's going to be there whether we want it to or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. It's like letting that part of yourself be free also allows every other part of you to be free, because sexuality is such a big part of being human. Sexuality with ourselves, sexuality with other people, the thoughts we have, the feelings we have, what arouses us, like getting aroused by your life, by your work, by your book, by your other book, by having babies, like all of these things, like being aroused by life is a part of the experience, being in pleasure. And that doesn't mean having a sex addiction or a porn addiction. It means allowing yourself to be free in your desire and your experience, so that you're not, kind of like what I said earlier, like you're not handcuffed, you're not a prisoner of your own experience.
Right. Yeah. And it's another way we can choose ourselves.
Yes.
Oh,
Full circle. God. Good job.
Full circle. I don't know if we can do that right. Okay, so my very last question for you is, how do you live a life of abundance?
I live a life of abundance by knowing that there's so much more possible than I ever imagined. And I really believe in being in receiving, especially in that feminine energy of receiving. I've been in the masculine for most of my life, and I still definitely step back into that more than I'd like to. But I feel like true abundance came to me when I started to learn how to allow and to receive. And I'm learning that even more and more now, being pregnant, like receiving a baby, right? And holding a baby. There's something so profound about willingly inviting things into your energy. And when you can do that, anything is possible. And that will lead to any abundance you can imagine.
Kelli, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much.